What is going on, Fantasy Fam? Welcome to the week. What is this week 14 edition? How crazy is that of Plugged In? I am your host slash guest, JM to Win from 1 Week Season, here with my good buddy Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points. Scott, my man, how are you doing? How was this last weekend for you? How's life? How's love? How's Christmas preparation? Whatever you want to talk about.
Everything's good, man. Thanks for bringing the heat on the intro. I feel good. I feel plugged in. Get it? Plugged in.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, man. This was an awesome week for me and the subscribers. Johnny won like 20,000. One of our subs finished first in everything. He won 146K on like $200, $300 in entries. I smashed. I made 8 lineups. 6 of them cashed. I had most of my money on Jalen Hurts doubles. And if Kenneth Walker didn't die, those probably would have finished in first place. That was especially tilting because all of the RB injuries led to a Geno dub stack smashing and overtaking Johnny. That cost him like 30K. On all of my non-Hurts lineups, I went a little chalky at wide receiver, so I just went all in on St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Christian Watson, Christian Kirk, and those did really well. My only bad play, JM, which I'm sure you could guess, was Nick Westbrook-Akina, my Galaxy Brain play of the week, which never
you had to pull the trigger, though, after Mike White worked out.
I did. So the funny thing is, like, the reason why I was all about it was Philadelphia is the league's top slot funnel defense, and he runs all of his routes from the slot. They have the two of the best perimeter corners in football, and their starting slot is out, and they've just been like bleeding fantasy points to the slot since he went down. But Treylon Burks, I should have seen this coming. I think Joe actually called it. Joe Dolan was their full-time slot until his injury. And once he went down, they were just like, whatever, screw it. We're toast. My number 2 Galaxy Brain play would have been Trent Sherfield against the number 2 slot funnel defense, who did have that long bomb. But yeah, lesson learned. I'm just done with Galaxy Brain plays. Like, if you can't even pronounce a guy's name and he's 0% owned, maybe don't have 30% exposure. But yeah, this was a great week. I also ran really well outside of the Kenneth Walker injury. Like I swapped to like Dulcich on one last second lineup and someone else, and those guys did really well when usually it's always the opposite. How did you do, JM? I'm guessing with, a lot of the chalky wide receivers hitting, you maybe intentionally faded them.
Yeah, so I did have Nick Westbrook-Akini in 3% of
my. Man, I appreciate you. I owe you one for that. But, I feel
you texted me. You said, "How excited are you to hear my Galaxy Brain play this week?" And you said, "Wait, don't answer that." But when you shared it with me, I didn't even ask for details. I just said he's low owned and he has upside. Like, I like plays like that, right? It's not like I went 30% on him, but I did have him on 3%, and I'd do that again. So interestingly, on my main build, is the second week in a row that, and again, we don't care about cashing, except when you do cash, it's nice, right? Versus like not cashing if you're right on the cut line. As in, like, over time, you're like, okay, but we're still aiming for first place. And yet those min cashes do still add up as far as like a floor. So second week in a row where I finished like 2 or 3 points out of the money in the game changer, which is, where like 30% of my buy-in for the week is. So that was disappointing. And then my large field play got absolutely wrecked. I think I cashed like $200 in the slant out of, max entered. So that's like 1350 entered in there. So on my main build, though, I had Amon-Ra St. Brown and I had Garrett Wilson and smaller field tournament. So the thinking there was like, give myself as few things as possible to get right. Mathematically, those are high probability guys. And then I can be different from those, different in other spots in order to like gain my edge. So I also went Burrow. I had Burrow and Chase, and I was kind of back and forth. Like, Joe Burrow came into the game with 6 games of 30-plus points since the start of last year. Mahomes has 6 games of 30-plus points this year, right? And so it's kind of like, well, if Burrow's hitting that could end up coming through P. Ryan. That could end up coming another way. Whereas if this game is taking off, then Mahomes is almost certainly hitting. So I was back and forth on that all week. Thankfully, I went Burrow, paired him with Chase and P. Ryan. So it didn't like kill me, didn't help me a ton. I think where I really got buried was George Kittle. And I would go back and make that play again because I really liked that game environment. I liked the fact that the week before against a Houston team that funnels everything toward the run, that Miami still came out and passed on 80% of their plays. And you can't run on San Francisco. Mike McDaniel knows that. And so I felt extremely confident that the Dolphins were going to come out and pass a ton. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be successful, but you know they're going to be passing. And one of the things that we see sometimes is you don't need a game to be high scoring in order for the one team to be passing, right? You need the concept that this game could be high scoring, the understanding that, hey, we might have to score points here. And you tend to see teams kind of push the envelope a little bit in games like that. So I felt comfortable with the Kittle play. Obviously, Garoppolo getting hurt didn't help. Would have probably minimum cashed if that hadn't happened. But, wasn't going to hit with that. And then I had Sky Moore as kind of like my skeleton key to unlock salary on the slate. Had been very involved in the schemed passing attack. I went back and watched each of the previous 2 Kansas City games. Those 6 targets, a lot of them were schemed targets, plays that were designed to go to him. And so the fact that he came out and got 0 targets is just something where you just say, well, I'll eat that and be wrong on that again. But yeah, it was kind of I'm at that point of fatigue that probably you were at a couple weeks ago when you took a couple weeks off. And kind of at that point of fatigue where yesterday I was like, man, I could use like 2 or 3 days off. And then last night my daughter slept for like 4 hours. So I got like 3 hours of sleep last night. I was just like, come on, I don't want to head into the week like this. But yeah, it was this last week and kind of compounded that where it's just like, I played well. I really don't have anything. Well, I have one big regret that I'll get to in a minute, but I played well. I don't have any major regrets besides this one thing, but then it just didn't work out. And I was just like, oh God, like I don't want to turn the page and start another week already again. But any thoughts on my stuff before I get to my big regret of the week?
No, I'm just with you. Like my body is falling apart. So I can't imagine how some of these actual NFL players feel versus.
Oh my God, I know. I was thinking, well, that's what I was thinking yesterday. Like yesterday when I was like, oh man, like I feel like the Lions, like I'm not quite a playoff team this year, but I'm competitive. And so every week I'm like putting in the work and staying competitive. And so it's like, it would be hard to like wake up every week as the Detroit Lions and be like, okay, we're not making the playoffs this year, but we're competitive and we keep giving teams a hard time. Like let's put in the same amount of effort that these playoff teams are putting in. And then how much more difficult for a team like the Rams, where you're clearly out of it and so many guys are injured. And I was thinking about how creative Sean McVay is and how energetic he is. And like every week he's designing new plays and coming up with new, unique things to win that game. Like how easy would it be to be like, okay, not this week, like we're not going to win this week anyway. So let's just kick back a little bit. But it really helps you appreciate these NFL teams where their bodies are beat up, their minds are beat up. And also, that's one of the things that we can watch for throughout the season. We saw it a couple times under the Doug Marrone Jaguars teams where they literally just stopped playing. That first Derrick Henry blow-up game, he broke like 5 tackles on like a 98-yard touchdown run. And Myles Jack was the only one who actually tried to tackle him. And the others, Derrick Henry was just like shoving these guys down to the ground. And they're like, all right, that's fine. Like, we're not winning this game anyway. But yeah, it is. We'll be watching that down the stretch too of like, who are the teams that are literally not trying anymore, because those are teams that are great to attack. Okay, you want to hear my big regret of the week?
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts. I'm so pumped that you were on him. So all week, our write-up in the NFL Edge was like, hey, everything in this high-level wrote up the game is like everything in this matchup tilts toward the air, right? But we know that the Eagles like to build things off the run. And so I was like, you know what, I don't write up the whole NFL Edge, so I have a little bit more time to dig into some of these nuanced things. So I was like, let me dig in. I went back to this game against Washington, which is like the best comp for this matchup against Tennessee. And first 3 plays were run plays from the Eagles, but they got the ball at the 18-yard line off a fumble. Those are not schemed plays. Run, scored a touchdown. Their next 18 plays, 16 of them were pass attempts. And I used that all week to be like, A.J. Brown is a fantastic play. We took the over on Jalen Hurts passing yards, 221.5. And I told Xander, I was like, this is like the most fire prop bet we found all year. And he's like, are you sure? Like, I know the Eagles like to run the ball. And I was like, no, trust me. Like, they're going to pass the ball. an enormous amount in this game. And I talked about Nick Sirianni is a player's coach and would want to get AJ Brown the ball. I talked about how Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown are super tight, and like they're going to want to have a big game through AJ Brown. Like it's not hurting them, right? It's still helping them win. So why not get the ball to AJ Brown? And I was on these Hurts doubles early in the year, like at low ownership. And so it was like all week, it was all I could think about was back and forth on, do I play AJ Brown on my main build, right? As I got to close to Sunday, it was like, okay, yeah, but like, let's just take like higher certainty things. I don't need to take this guesswork on AJ Brown here. Cause it was like, even if he has a huge game, it's probably about 30 points, right? It's not 40, 42, 45 in most scenarios. And so it was like, I can get away with not playing him on my main build. And that was kind of where I ended things. But I never thought about swinging all the way the other way of like, if I keep saying Jalen Hurts is going to pass a lot, the other times he's had to do this were he put up 340 yards against Washington in like week 2 or 3, whatever that was, had the ball for only 19 minutes and 34 seconds, the second matchup against Washington, and still put up really good stats in those 19 minutes, 34 seconds, 26 pass attempts. And then there was one other game where it was against Pittsburgh, where good run defense, bad pass defense. They went pass heavy, and same thing. Jalen Hurts like lit them on fire through the air. And so, yeah, I was like, as soon as Devante Smith caught that early big pass, I was like, wait a second, why didn't I go Hurts doubles? And then sure enough, it just kind of continued snowballing that direction. So I think my thought process on not playing AJ Brown on my main build was good, and like played Amon-Ra St. Brown instead, right? I had Jamar Chase with Burrow, and you like, if Chase hits, Burrow's also hitting. It's like 5 out of 6 times that Chase is hit big, Burrow's also hit. So I'm going to play like Chase on this Burrow build. But yeah, it was like, why did I not consider like swapping off of Burrow and just going all in on this Hurts one? So talk to me a little bit about that one. Were you kind of seeing the same things I was seeing? How dumb was I for not pulling the trigger on that at low ownership?
No, so again, this week I finally ran really good. It was in my content. I said Joe Burrow is my favorite GPP quarterback. I also really like Tua at low ownership, Fields at low ownership, Hurts at low ownership. Goff was up there over Trevor Lawrence. And so what happened was, like, earliest in the week, I'm writing XFP and I'm talking about, oh, wow, Devonta Smith has 8 targets in 4 of his last 5 games. AJ Brown, 2 of his last 8 games. He's seen 8 or more targets. He's hit season highs in target share. He's led in first read target share in 3 of 4 games. And clearly the biggest beneficiary of the Dallas Goedert injury. So he is a nice value. And then I look at the matchup, like you said, it was a pass funnel. And also just like specifically with the quarterback, Tennessee was giving up the most schedule adjusted to quarterbacks through the air, but like the 3rd least on the ground, something like that. And so, okay, maybe this pushes doubles in play. Just something to keep in mind. This definitely could be a game where Hurts smashes through the air. And then, of course, he has the rushing upside. He just ran for the 4th most rushing yards in NFL history just the week prior. And then I look at ownership. I'm like, oh my God, AJ Brown is projected at 2%. Like that's obscene. And so I went in Sunday morning to make my lineups. Like you said, like I said before, body's falling apart. I had an ear infection all last week, and so I'm making these lineups, and wasn't in love with the Burrow lineups. The Tua lineups are really tough. Made a Fields Komet lineup, but I ended up with more Jalen Hurts doubles than anything else. And again, it's just like, okay, the matchup is clearly there for both wide receivers. Tennessee ranks bottom 7 to wide receiver 1s, bottom 7 to wide receiver 2s. AJ Brown has this massive upside at 2% projected. I forget what he came out at. Like that might have saved me if he was actually somewhat chalky, but yeah. And so that hit big. The reason why I didn't like absolutely smash was because, loved Garrett Wilson, loved Amon-Ra St. Brown, loved Christian Kirk, loved Keenan Allen, Devante Adams, Christian Watson, Terry McLaurin. And it's just like all of those guys smash big. And again, the lineup that took down Johnny Uticow, who is having like one of the most ridiculous DFS seasons ever. He played Geno Smith doubles at low ownership. and that smashed big. Again, it's like how much of that is all of the running backs getting hurt. But yeah, I don't know.
That's actually, so that brings up a couple things for this next week that we'll kind of swap back and forth, I think, between this last week and this next week. Couple interesting things. I do think that if Kenneth Walker misses, the Eagles really just have like they just have like aerial attack running backs, right? They don't have anybody that they're going to feel comfortable running their typical offense with. They're playing this week the Panthers, which obviously is a team that you can attack on the ground. I think that's an interesting spot. Do you have any thoughts on that of like, okay, no Rashad Penny, no Kenneth Walker, assuming Kenneth Walker misses, right? And Kenneth Walker could play, so let's not spend too much time on it, obviously. But is that a spot where you think that the Seahawks actually like lean a little bit more pass heavy? Because that was my initial thought looking ahead to this next week is, they could actually pass the ball a little bit more than we're used to, even if they control this game just by virtue of these injuries. And obviously this last week they're playing the Rams, like one of the top run defenses as well, right? But any thoughts on that?
So that was a big reason why I did love Joe Burrow this week is, all right, Joe Mixon's out. He was averaging 18 carries per game. You replace him with the scat back. I think a lot of it really does come down to Kenneth Walker's status. We saw Pete Carroll letting Geno Smith cook as early as week 1, week 2, week 3. And right now he's a top 5 quarterback in just about any stat you want to look at. He's playing out of his mind. So why wouldn't you just keep letting him cook, especially now with all of these running back injuries and the matchup? To argue back against that, I mean, we've seen Pete Carroll, like, okay, all of your running backs are hurt. You just signed Christine Michael off of his couch, and now you're giving him 18 carries per game. So you really never know. But yeah, Geno to me is probably another great GPP play this week and just about every week.
Yeah,
it seems like he Freaky Friday with Russell Wilson.
No kidding, I know.
And it seems like DFS still is unwilling to totally accept that we have a Russell Wilson, like we have 2020 Russell Wilson at $1,000 cheaper than what he was priced at. And we're still, hesitant for some reason.
First off, I like that you pulled out a Freaky Friday reference for all you youngsters out there. Secondly, I was thinking this morning about Devante Adams, right? He had the big game week 1. Everyone was like, oh, Devante Adams, it's Derek Carr. And then he got shut down by the Cardinals. I think this is sequentially what happened. Got shut down by the Cardinals and then played the Titans. The Titans had just been smoked by Stephon Diggs. And then they shut down Devante Adams. I think it was 5 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown. And then everyone's like, oh, Devante Adams is just not the same without Aaron Rodgers. And it's like, this guy has been like the wide receiver MVP, and people are still like, the perception is those first, like 2 of the first 3 weeks. And they're like, yeah, this guy's not the same. Yeah, and it's wild to see how these biases are built, right? Like if Devante Adams had smashed weeks 1, 2, and 3, if the Raiders had a winning record, then people would be like Devante Adams' ownership would be 30% every week instead of 15% every week. Like he's cheaper than these other guys. A lot of these, like he's cheap, a little bit cheaper than Tyreek Hill last week, a little bit cheaper than Justin Jefferson, and the weeks before that he'd been like several hundred cheaper than those guys. And obviously those guys are phenomenal plays as well, hitting week in and week out. But like, just the fact that Devante Adams goes so overlooked, it's interesting how those biases get formed. Okay, so speaking of biases and speaking of this last week and this next week, Trevor Lawrence, you mentioned that you had Goff over Trevor Lawrence. I ended up, on like Friday, I was like, man, Trevor Lawrence might be on my main build, and then looked at ownership and was like, wait, he's one of the most popular guys. So I was like, let me poke holes in this, right? And one of the holes was that the Lions defense was better than people realize, as in like they have been getting better throughout the season. Still not a great defense, but they're not just like run over this defense. I think they're 22nd in run defense DVOA heading into this last week, and we think of them as like the stone worst run defense in football. And so anyhow, I ended up with like 3% Trevor Lawrence in large field play. He wasn't on any of my 3 max, 5 max. This next week though, right? So like we had this perception of Trevor Lawrence. He had this big game against Baltimore, and then everyone's like, we've got to play him this week at high ownership. And then he disappointed. But when you look through his game logs, there are a lot of like 23, 24 point games in there. He's playing Tennessee this next week. And we know that Tennessee at last look was facing over 40 pass attempts per game, most pass attempts per game in the NFL, highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL. So if we're expecting the Jags to come up against this matchup where tilts opponents toward the air, good quarterback matchup, a good stable of wide receivers, I would imagine that ownership will fall apart this week a little bit after last week. You have any early thoughts on Trevor Lawrence going against the Titans? I think you're on mute, or I know you're on mute.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I just know Trevor Lawrence, kind of is one of the most overrated players in all of football, especially from a fantasy perspective. Like, why are you ever excited to play him? He has one career game over 25.2 DraftKings fantasy points. I mean, Gardner Minshew in fewer career starts has like 5, right? And so with Lawrence, it was, he's chalky. And this is also a player like I'm instinctually inclined to just fade every week. And then, like you said, everyone was overlooking the fact that Detroit's defense looked significantly improved. Yes, they were still giving up a ton of fantasy points, but a lot of that was coming on the ground to quarterbacks. But if you look at the efficiency metrics, since they fired their defensive backs coach in week 9, they ranked top 5 in adjusted completion percentage, top 3 in interception percentage, second best in passer rating, top 10 in pressure rate. And that just like wasn't factored in at all. I think this was an amazing call by you and me, as we both saw that the Lions were 2-point underdogs, and we were like, what?
Yeah.
And then you tweeted about it. Your tweet was excellent, just kind of like looking at how close they were and how tough their schedule's been. And and lo and behold, I think the line ended up moving 3 points back towards in Detroit's direction, and now they're favorites against the nearly undefeated Vikings this week.
Are they favorites this week? No way. Oh my goodness, they are. I mean, it's a shame that the Lions are not going to be in the playoffs because they really are a fun team. And
this is like the token plugged in team. Like we're like hardcore
Lions. Oh yeah, we've been Lions guys since the start of the year. Yeah, this is they are like all these 2, 3, 4 point losses against like playoff teams, number 1 seeds, number 2 seeds, like these teams that are vying for like the top positions in the NFL, and they've been right there with them week in and week out. It is crazy. Sometimes we talk about how sharp Vegas is, right? But we see the swings of like perception on these things. Like let's take like Cortland Sutton's props for yardage early in the season. It was like 70 receiving yards every week. And then like now it's like 46.5 or something, right? And like it was considered efficient then, and it's considered efficient now, but it's like, no, this like we just didn't know this guy's role yet. Lions being underdogs at home against the Jags last week and now being favored against the Vikings. That's a crazy swing right there. That was the next thing I was going to ask you about was this, because I don't know if you've looked much at this next week's slate, but there's not a ton, which I really like weeks like that because a lot of times when there's not a ton to love, people get on the wrong games, and then like you can be on the games that you really like and you're the only one there. Like you're with a much smaller chunk of the field. So one of the games obviously for this next week that's very interesting is Vikings and Lions. I don't know what the over under is on that yet. I'm sure it's attractive, but any early thoughts on that? Because I do think that's, probably the way to go, right? And then it becomes an interesting question of like, how do you go there? Because Kirk Cousins has, I think, 0 games of 24 DraftKings points this year. And if you went back through Matthew Stafford's game logs last year, different quarterbacks, different offenses, different weapons, but still like similar systems, similar concepts as far as how they're going to call the plays. Matthew Stafford had like maybe 1 game above like 25 or 26 DraftKings points. Like he wasn't like a high producer for fantasy. Granted, Kirk Cousins like keeps continuing to fail to top 300 yards, a lot of times just barely. So that's like an extra 3 points right there that he could get random touchdown variants. He could have a big game. But yeah, and then Jared Goff, we know that a lot of times he has these solid games, but it's like 17, 18, 20 points. So I kind of feel like people could either get trapped into being like, well, you got to play the quarterbacks from this game if you're playing this game, or they could end up avoiding this game a little bit more than they should because they don't want to play the quarterbacks. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown will be popular. Justin Jefferson will be popular. I would think that DeAndre Swift, whose price barely moved, will be popular. But
Yeah.
yeah, any early thoughts on that game? Maybe some. I don't think Jameson Williams is going to get a ton of run, right? So DJ Shark is still interesting. He was interesting last week. Ancillary weapons on the Vikings, maybe Dalvin Cook if he's coming in low owned. So yeah, any early thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I keep getting asked every single week start sit questions. It's like, do I play Kirk Cousins or do I play this shitty guy? And every week I'm like, yeah, probably play Kirk Cousins. Every week I'm wrong. He's just been so underwhelming. Jared Goff, another reason why I liked him significantly more than Lawrence at ownership was he averages 20.9 fantasy points per game at home this year, 9.3 on the road. And like that's just like a wild differential. And guess what? He's home again this week. So I think I'd be more inclined to play Goff than Cousins. And like he was incredible last week. He was lights out. And Detroit punted like once. And so yeah, so long as Amon-Ra isn't continually getting tackled at the one, if some of those turn into touchdowns, robbing Jamal Williams of points, he could really smash. And then again, home away splits. Detroit is averaging 38.8 combined points. Detroit games, 38.8 combined points on the road, and 59.7 combined points at home. And so, is this the new Coors Field of the NFL? It really could be. It really, even with their defense seemingly taking a step forward. Really like that. Another potential Coors Field is Miami. Tua's shockingly low owned. Like he should just never be low owned in my eyes. Granted, it was a tough matchup. He was down both tackles. He was up against Mike McDaniel was up against his daddy, Kyle Shanahan, who really seemingly had an answer for him. But yeah, that's another one. Who are they playing this week?
They're on the Sunday night game. They're playing the Chargers.
Oh, damn. All right.
But yeah, I mean, they're and so like Hilo's been saying this year, Tua doubles are in play until the end of time. Where basically it's like every week, either it's going to be high owned because it's such a good spot that it should be high owned, or it's going to be low owned and it's still a way better spot than people realize because of what this offense is capable of. And that one kind of fell apart too, sort of randomly this last week. And I didn't have a ton of that, but I had. It was a staple in my large field play, but Waddle got kind of banged up and was hobbled out there. And then even Tua, he just missed like the last drive, but that was a handful of pass attempts and extra yardage that he could have picked up there. And then I think, really just the way that game played out, it just sort of broke down, but it was a great game. Also, it was a great potential game environment. Last week on the show, you brought up Christian McCaffrey in that game, and we talked about that. I think good call from us on that one of like, you basically said if he's going to play 80% of the snaps, he projects as the top play, and yet like he's probably not going to be treated as such. And I think we both said in the show, he probably plays over 80% of the snaps, right? Like Eli Mitchell being gone changes the way that they're going to use Christian McCaffrey. And sure enough, he played, I think it was 82% of the snaps, ended up being a really sharp way to spend that salary last week. Another game that's interesting this next week, Browns at Bengals. And I said earlier that there are games in which, so I use the 49ers and Dolphins as the example. There are games in which, even if the opponent's not scoring points, the team that might be a little bit more balanced sometimes, they're predisposed to pass the ball more because they know that they have to score points in that game. And so a lot of times you'll look through game logs and you'll find this quarterback who had a big game in what was a potential shootout and didn't turn into a shootout, right? But like they still called a more passive game. They stayed more aggressive throughout because they had to be concerned about the opponent coming back and scoring points. Browns at Bengals, right? So this is a week where outside of this, we got the Cowboys playing the Texans. We know the Cowboys are going to prefer to run the ball and can run the ball there. We have the Bills taking on the Jets defense. Maybe they have a big game, but that's a tough spot. We have Jags and Titans, which if the Jags don't get this going through the air, nothing's going to happen there. We have the Eagles against the Giants. Makes Hurts interesting, but Hurts can attack on the ground. Miles Sanders can attack on the ground against the Giants. Ravens and Steelers, Tyler Huntley, we can talk about that in a minute, but two teams that aren't going to push the aggression unless they're pushed by the other team to push the aggression. So that could be kind of low scoring. Chiefs at Broncos, tough pass game matchup for Mahomes. He's obviously going to do well, but to his salary, probably not. Bucks at 49ers, right? And then Panthers, Seahawks. Those are the games on the slate. So that brings us back to Bengals and Browns, where it's like, okay, which games, like if Zach Taylor comes into this game, right? Mixon's healthy, sure, he comes back this week. Bad run defense for the Browns. But don't you also say, well, already we're one of the top 3 teams in pass rate over expectation, the Bengals. And we're playing the Browns with Deshaun Watson, who has another week of practice, is that much likelier to be sharp. I could see the Bengals entering this game and saying like, hey, we're going to have to score points here. Let's be aggressive early. We've seen the Bengals be super aggressive in divisional matchups. And with how few games there are on this slate that really stand out, this looks to me like one of those games that people could see it as like, I don't know if I should go here or not. And then it ends up being like 37-30. So thoughts on this game on either side of the ball. And then also, I'm guessing you weren't on Deshaun Watson this last week. Is that correct?
No, he's one of my highest owned players across all of my leagues in the season long. Just to me, it seemed like you were getting a player for free who had, top 6 upside throughout the fantasy playoffs. He's finished top 6 in fantasy points per game every year of his career. But no, I played Houston defense. He just looked so bad this preseason. 700 days removed from his last regular season game. Rapport is a thing. And I don't know. I think there's a good chance they get trucked. He's still, working through the new offense, shaking off the rust. And the offensive coordinator's aware of this. And hey, we didn't get Nick Chubb the ball enough last week. Let's do it this week. You brought up Patrick Mahomes. I think if people are scared to play him against this defense, I would be really excited to play him just because, hey, it's Patrick Mahomes who's on pace for the most passing yards in NFL history. Denver's also something of a tight end funnel defense. I do think the Dallas running backs are going to be extremely chalky in this matchup. I think Pollard's going to be far more chalky than Zeke, as he should be, but maybe he's so much more chalky, it makes Zeke the better GPP play. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up, but it's escaping me.
Yeah, the Cowboys won last night. I was even calculating what their combined salary is and what they would need to score together. They would need to score about 50 together to keep you on a 200-point pace, and they've scored 42 and 57 combined in 2 of their last 3 games. The 57-pointer, they combined for 4 touchdowns. So that's tough to bank on. And as Zanimir would say, like if you're getting a 4-touchdown game, you'd like it to be an absolute smash, right? Like you'd like to really separate, not just barely clear what you need. But when I see a spot like that where it's like, hey, these 2 guys could legitimately combine for 4x their salary, well, then they become like an either or type setup where it's not like every roster of mine, I'll have one or the other, but it becomes a spot where it's like, well, even if they get to 42 points, 43 points, that means one of them is getting the bigger piece of that pie more than likely. And so like being back and forth between the 2 guys really sets you up nicely kind of across your roster. So yeah, that's a spot that's very interesting to me this week. And I'll also, with the Browns thing, I'll push back a little bit. And I agree with you, right? So Deshaun Watson was popping in a lot of projections. And so I bumped up my exposure over what it would have been, but it was still well below the field. I probably had like 3 or 4% Deshaun Watson, and I probably had like 8 or 9% Houston defense. That was another thing that killed me on my main roster was I had Tennessee defense and not Houston defense. So that was quite a swing of points there on my main build. But yeah, one of the things is like we sometimes want to wait for a guy to show it on the field before we get behind it. And yet a lot of times like the money is made in getting behind it before they show it on the field. And so I don't think that for me, that doesn't mean like betting on the Browns on my main build, but it could mean betting on the Bengals and then betting on like Amari or DPJ as a bring back, right? Where it's like, if the Browns are competitive enough in this game, and it's a tough run game matchup with DJ Reader healthy, if the Browns are competitive enough in this game, then the Bengals keep passing, and then like Amari or Donovan Peoples-Jones is able to do something in response. It's kind of how I'm looking at it. Because if the Browns are not competitive, there will be a point where Zach Taylor says, well, let's just run the ball, unless he goes like full on Bengals versus Ravens 2021 mode, where he's like, let's get Burrow 525 passing yards for no reason, right? Like he's done that once or twice before, but realistically, this probably becomes a more balanced second half offense from the Bengals if they have a big lead. But I think that we could see like week 2 of Deshaun Watson coming back, this offense could look better. And then all of a sudden, like the bring back with Amari or DPJ sets up really nicely, and the Bengals could end up having a bigger game. So yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Am I like grasping at straws here? Because it is a pretty thin slate once we get past this Vikings Lions game.
No, you're right. I was gonna say, yeah, definitely need Jamar Chase exposure. Obviously, Higgins too is always a strong play, but definitely more team Chase. The Browns cornerbacks are really bad, and this could definitely be a potential blow up spot. He looked awesome. He was hurdling defenders. He did not look banged up last week. So definitely Joe Burrow, a good play. I think of all the names we've talked so far, Jared Goff might be the most enticing to me.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's you always have to be concerned about them getting the ball to the 1 yard line, and Jamal Williams
I know.
like soaking up 2 or 3 touchdowns of his own. Jamal Williams. I'm
going to say it. Like, I'm making a rule this week. I need at least one Jamal Williams lineup, because it's so bizarre how every Sunday morning I suffer from amnesia and just totally forget that this guy leads the league in touchdowns.
Well, he never smashes either, right? It's not like he's ever burying you for not playing.
But 20 points is probably going to be chalky this week.
But 20 points is pretty valuable at his price tag. You know, like you free up some salary this deep into the season, you get 20 points. Real quickly, the Bengals defense, I want to highlight this. They played great against Mahomes last week. I'm a big Lou Anarumo
every week.
But with Awuzie out, they have not looked as good. And this is the quarterbacks they've played this season. Okay, I'm going to go in order. Mitch Trubisky, Cooper Rush, Joe Flacco, Teddy Bridgewater, Lamar Jackson, Matt Ryan, Marcus Mariota, Jacoby Brissett, I believe it was Baker Mayfield, Kenny Pickett, Ryan Tannehill. Like, that is, outside of Lamar and Mahomes, that is like the easiest list of quarterbacks you could have played throughout an entire season. And so I also am like, I'm not wanting to overrate this Bengals defense based on like their season long numbers, right? Oh, they're really good against the pass. And it's like, yeah, they're really good against the pass, but in the context of the passers they've played so far. And we did see them get burned by, who was it? They got burned by Pickett. They got burned by Brissett. And, you know, those are both since Awuzie went down, and I believe it was in week 8. So, I do think that becomes an interesting game environment. And I'm with you. Like the Jared Goff one, the fact that I can sit here and know all these things and still be like, I don't want to pull the trigger on Jared Goff. Like his ownership never gets out of control, right? Like he's still a way to differentiate, and his pass catchers, at least Amon-Ra St. Brown, will be popular. And then you kind of ride that up with the Goff bet at a low price tag. It certainly can open things up. Similar price tag this next week, Tyler Huntley. I was surprised last night looking through his game logs. He wasn't as explosive of a fantasy scorer as you would have expected. I'm going to pull it up right now. And then he's playing the Steelers, who, like, some of the guys on OWS were kind of high on Kenny Pickett this last week as a tournament play. And I was saying, like, man, you know what? I think my Kenny Pickett's going to win someone a Millie Maker this year. Like, this bet is in jeopardy because Matt Canada is just calling this super, like, low octane game plan unless the Steelers are forced to put up points. If they're ahead, he's just like turning into this super conservative game caller. And so Tyler Huntley last year, let's see, 11.7 fantasy points, 17.3, 35.9, 12.2, 9.8. So basically the one big game, he had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game, 2 passing touchdowns in that game. He had only 1 other passing touchdown the rest of the year, no other rushing touchdowns. He's not better than Lamar Jackson, right, as a quarterback. And Lamar Jackson has had all of these games of like 18 to 22 to 23 points. So at first glance, you look at Huntley and you're like, oh, I remember this guy from last year. He's going to smash. Is he going to smash against the Steelers? I mean, it's still a good matchup, but not as good as it had been. Any early thoughts on Tyler Huntley and even this game, right? Because if one side's pushing this game, the other side's going to be aggressive and both sides can put up points. but it just seems like the sort of game where potentially neither team puts up points, and so neither team gets aggressive.
I feel like I'm definitely going to have exposure just because he's going to be too cheap. He has the rushing upside, and then the stack is obvious. Mark Andrews just absolutely smashing with Huntley under center, massive increase in target share. But a big question is Mark Andrews even healthy? He hasn't done much for a number of weeks now. He's off the injury report, but he was dealing with multiple injuries a few weeks ago. I think you nailed it. It's a week where there's not a lot obvious, which are usually great weeks for us. And he's in play, but he's not definitely not close to a must play or anything like that. Geno Smith only 6,200. What is Huntley at if he's at 5,500? Jared Goff 5,600. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think this is a Goff week.
Okay, and then we've got what was I about to say? Something about those quarterbacks in those. Oh no, that's what I was going to say. Garrett Wilson's price. Garrett Wilson went up to 5,900. I don't know what DraftKings is doing. I don't know if they're if somebody died and they were supposed to be setting the prices. But yeah, the price tags on DeAndre Swift and Garrett Wilson are extremely interesting. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown went up to 7.8K. And that's kind of a tough decision, right? Where he's going to get at least 20 points, but he's only gotten over 30, maybe 3 times, since the start of last year. So you're like, yeah, he can end up with 24, 25, 23, and it doesn't kill me for not having him. And I can go a different direction with that salary. Like that's a good price. Garrett Wilson against the Bills. I guess that's kind of what I want to pick your brains on is that Bills defense. Like how healthy are they right now? Are they still a defense that we're not scared to attack? Because if that's the case, his target share is so high. And then last week I was trying to poke holes in this Garrett Wilson thing, right? I was looking at Josh Palmer. I'd watched the Chargers game from last week, and I was like, man, Josh Palmer's good. He's getting targets, and his target share was pretty similar to Garrett Wilson's. And then you look at red zone targets, and Garrett Wilson's top 5 or so in the NFL and targets inside the 10, targets inside the 20. It's he's getting all these targets. He's so explosive, and he's getting looks close to the end zone. How do you price this guy at 5,900? And then it's almost like, how do you not play him? Which I say that knowing that I can always not play a popular guy. But any thoughts on Garrett Wilson at this price tag against this Bills defense?
It's insane. He's still in the 5K range. Darius Slayton has been in the 5K range for 6 weeks. What are you doing? I want to imagine there's just some guy behind the computer who's saying, I don't see it with Garrett Wilson. Slayton. That's the guy. When in reality, it's just they have an algorithm and they had a fact checker. It was oh, nope, got to butt this guy up 1,800. And they just don't care anymore. They're all about their NFT business or firing off mediocre tweets or whatever it is they're doing. I'm inclined to just go all in on this. If you want to critique it, you could say, well, he's going to be the highest owned wide receiver of the slate. Tre'Davious White is coming back. I don't know. I think this is just an all-in play for me. I said 3 weeks ago, he's okay. Zach Wilson's benched. He's a league winner. And there's been nothing since then that's been able to talk me off of it. In fact, I see him as 2022's version of 2021 Amon-Ra St. Brown, where if you just played St. Brown every week, you were printing money.
Yeah, and we get into this habit of as we see a player's price tag rise, we remember what they were priced at before, and then we now feel oh, well, maybe they're overpriced, right? We don't know enough about these guys. And I always go back to Odell Beckham and Mike Evans' rookie year, and as they got up to 5,500, it was oh man, can we pay this price tag? And I remember writing up Mike Evans was 5,800. And I said, this is the last time for years you'll be able to get him under 6K. And I think last year he dipped under 6K for a week or something like that, right? And it's that was since what was the rookie year, 2015. And so you see these guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown's a great example as well. That their price tag starts rising, and it starts being well, am I overpaying for them? Objectively, no, we're not overpaying for Garrett Wilson. Mike Johnson was saying week 2 or week 3, this is probably a 7K wide receiver. And then Zach Wilson came in and kind of tanked his value, but now he's back in a good situation from a quarterback standpoint, which once again makes him a 7K wide receiver that we're getting down here. Now, wide receiver is the most volatile scoring, or pass catchers are way more volatile than quarterbacks and running backs. And so can he fail? Absolutely, which is why I really like what you said about all in. I think that's the way to play it, right? Is like you either say like, okay, I'm going to go underweight, like I'll go half of what the field is playing on Garrett Wilson, recognizing that he can miss because any wide receiver can miss. Look through Justin Jefferson's game logs, right? He has like 4 or 5 games of 15 points this year. Devante Adams is, I think, one game below double digits and then a bunch of like 14 or 15. So he can definitely miss. He can get 12, 13 points, but he, like, if he hits, he can hit so much higher than what his price tag says that he can hit, right? And so if you say, well, I'm not gonna just like go even with the field or go a little bit overweight, I'll just say I'll go all in. If I'm wrong, it's not going to kill my rosters and I can win in other places. But if I'm right, now like all my rosters get those Garrett Wilson points. And but yeah, I mean, I think that the first step is recognizing that this guy is definitely underpriced, which if you're watching this, listening to this, and you're like, I'm not sure on Garrett Wilson. I'm with this DraftKings guy. I'm not really sure on Garrett Wilson. We can sit here and tell you for sure he's underpriced. Doesn't guarantee he's going to hit this week, but definitely price lower than he should be. Buffalo going against that Jets defense is interesting too, right? I mean, that's a tough spot. Like the game environment as a whole could kind of underwhelm.
I think the way to think about it is like what percentage should he be owned? I don't know. 80%, right? Like something absurd. I think he's going to be 50% owned. So I don't know that it's all in or nothing. It's more like I'm going to be all in single entry in super large field tournaments. Maybe I'll just have a calculated 0 just because like he's probably going to be 50% owned. And I think what you do better than anyone is if X equals Y, where like these sort of calculations in terms of roster building, where you're such an expert. It's okay, what does a Garrett Wilson fade Millie Maker lineup look like? Does that have Bills defense plus James Cook? Does that have Elijah Moore? What does that look like, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if you're betting on Garrett Wilson failing, you're betting on the game environment as a whole disappointing. And so that would either come through the Jets defense having a really good game, which they can do against, like Josh Allen's been way more mistake prone this year than people are giving him credit for. He's taking sacks, he's throwing interceptions near the top of the league in interceptions thrown. So it could be the Jets kind of controlling this game, and then maybe it's a Bam Knight type of game, right? Where it's like Jets defense and Bam Knight, or it could just be the Bills defense doing really well against Mike White, which is also not unreasonable to expect. And then the Bills defense is putting up points. The Bills are controlling this game. The Jets are unable to get anything going. I also think, you texted me this last week. You said, like, theoretically, if I build a roster without Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, is there anything I have to account for on those rosters, right? Like, and I said to you, Garrett Wilson, no, because he's like such a central part of their offense. And if their offense fails, it's not like somebody else is definitely getting those points. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, it was like, you don't have to account for him. You just have to be aware that like what his ownership is and his points. And there were some other aspects there, but yeah, I think that this is kind of a spot like that where you don't necessarily have to account for it because you just need this game as a whole to be low scoring. Like if the Bills are putting up points, if they're significantly outscoring the Jets, at some point in the game, Garrett Wilson's going to be piling up targets and putting up some level of points more than likely, right? So it's like, you don't want to be like, yeah, I'm going to bet on these Bills pass catchers and then not have Garrett Wilson. You got to assume that Garrett Wilson is getting involved, getting a lot of targets. What do you have? 15 targets last week, right? That like random guys don't just see 15 targets. And so unless Zay Jones, he kind of saw like double-digit targets a couple weeks ago. He's kind of a random guy. But generally speaking, like you get 15 targets, you're a centerpiece of your offense. And so if the Bills are putting up points, that the centerpiece of the Jets is going to be doing something in this game. But I think that the likeliest way for Garrett Wilson to fail is just the fact that these are good defenses, and good defenses can kind of slow down a game environment. Buffalo, there could be weather. I don't know. Buffalo's favored by 9.5, which seems like a lot against this Jets team that has been consistently competitive. And obviously, that's the difference between the Jets getting that, like being up 3 and scoring a touchdown on their last drive or not. And then the Jets coming back and not kicking a field goal, trying to get the touchdown, right? Like the Jets could win the Bills could win by 10. It's just a hefty number for this matchup. So yeah, that's kind of my rambling take on that. Is you don't necessarily have to account for it, but if you're playing this game environment, you got to assume that Garrett Wilson's going to be involved in some way.
Yeah, you said something really interesting. You said, Josh Allen hasn't played especially well of late, very turnover prone, and Buffalo is running the ball a bit more of late. The last 3 weeks, their running backs are averaging 26.7 carries per game. Throughout the remainder of the season, that's only 16.9. So an increase of 10 running back rushing attempts per game. Yeah, maybe they are trying to hide him. Maybe this injury is still bothering him. Over the last 6 or 7 weeks or so, he easily leads all quarterbacks in turnover-worthy throws. He's made a bunch of wow plays, but still, that's a little concerning. Maybe there's some upside, and unfortunately, this has now become a three-way committee backfield. But at the very least, it's an argument against Buffalo's side, where 5 weeks ago, Josh Allen would be everyone would be all in on Josh Allen, and the Jets defense is good. It's legitimately really good.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, one last spot. I want to pick your brains on Titans going against the Jags. So we've talked about the public's perception of Derrick Henry, he can smash in any spot. You always got to consider him. And then we've been like, yeah, but he's smashed, truly smashed, 10 times over the last 3 years and over the last 4 years, whatever it is, right? And 6 of those 10 times have been against Houston and Jacksonville. Jacksonville is obviously a better defense than they've been in the past, but there's still a defense that there's still a team that Tennessee is capable of playing with a lead against. And there's still a defense that Derrick Henry is capable of smashing. And the Titans defense just had -2 points against the Eagles. Granted, I played the Titans defense, like I said, on my main build. Eagles had almost every team had scored at least 5 defense special teams points against them. Jalen Hurts takes a decent number of sacks. They turn the ball over every once in a while. So I felt comfortable spending 2,200 and getting 5 to 9 points from the Titans defense. Instead, I got -2. But now we'll get people not wanting to play the Titans defense. And they're taking on Trevor Lawrence, who, as you said, is overrated, is not good. So I kind of like the idea this week of a Derrick Henry and Titans defense pairing. Any early thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I just have zero interest in Derrick Henry. Once you've enlightened me back, once you brought up that stat that his ceiling is massively overrated, I looked into it. Since he entered the league, he ranks 5th in games with 25 or more, maybe 30 or more DraftKings fantasy points, basically tied with Dalvin Cook in 18 extra games in comparison to Cook. And then half of all those games came against Houston or Jacksonville, which had generationally bad run defenses in 2019, 2020, 2021. And that was a death knell stat to me. And then if you want to dig deeper into this week's matchup, Jacksonville's defense is really good. Their run defense. They're top 10 in yards per carry allowed, top 10 in rushing fantasy points per game allowed. And of course, if you're facing Derrick Henry twice a year, you're probably going to go out of your way to draft some capable run stoppers. And then over the last 4 weeks, Derrick Henry averages 50 rushing yards per game on 2.7 yards per carry. It's been really bad. So no interest. And it's all because of the stat you gave me a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, every time that I see, you open up the DraftKings app on Sunday and you see, Derrick Henry 8% owned against the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's okay, that's 8% of rosters I don't have to compete with, right? They spent $8K on a running back who his good game is going to be 22, 23 points in this spot. And if he misses, he's going to get 6, 7, 8 points more than likely. I do think that Derrick Henry is hugely overrated as a play him, always consider him type of guy. But I do think that in games that they control, that he has potential to go for 40 plus points. So that's kind of a little bit more interesting than it is to me than it is to you. What does he have? He has one game this year over 30.2 DraftKings points, and sure enough, it was against Houston. So it's funny because Derrick Henry is a guy who for years I've been like, cool, all of you play him. I will literally never play him. And the only times I've even considered him have been against Houston and Jacksonville. And you bring up a good point about Jacksonville being a better run defense. And realistically, like at Derrick Henry's price tag, do I expect him to bury me if I don't play him? No. And so then therefore I probably shouldn't play him. But yeah, that's okay. Maybe I'm off of him then. Nick Chubb's another guy like that, right? Where like he has 2 games in his career over 33.3 DraftKings points. And you're like, sure, he can get to 4X. And that's great if you rostered him, but he's never going to bury me for not rostering him. And so I can just kind of cut him off of my list. I guess that can lead us to Christian McCaffrey with Brock Purdy under center at 8.5K. And I kind of think that he'll be low owned again just because people will be like, I don't know if I want to like attack, if I want to leverage this 49ers offense against this Bucks defense at 8,500. So let's close with that. Any thoughts on Christian McCaffrey now that we're down Jimmy Garoppolo, now that the 49ers Super Bowl hopes are rapidly dwindling?
Yeah, I love the roller coaster ride we've had with McCaffrey thus far, where it's, he's a top bell cow, he's awesome, but the quarterback sucks in Carolina. Oh my God, he's in San Francisco, he's going to be a league winner. No, wait. Elijah Mitchell is eating into 50% of the work. This sucks. Oh, Elijah Mitchell's out. But he's hurt, so he's going to be on a snap count. Oh, wait, never mind. That's not true. He's back to being a top league winner. And that, but now the quarterback sucks. But yeah, so I really see it as being like his projection should be 20% higher than any other player in fantasy. Even with this, inexperienced Mr. Irrelevant under center. If you look at his numbers without Elijah Mitchell and on the 49ers, this is like a 35-point role where he's 80% of the snaps, 90% of the routes, which is unheard of for a running back, 10 targets per game, 18 carries per game. It's just absolutely sickening for a player who maybe he's not as good as he once was. I think he's lost a little bit of explosion, but is still one of the best in the game. Basically like Austin Eckler with more targets and more carries, but a slightly worse offense. So really excited about him. With him, it's another matchup issue, though. Tampa Bay ranks top 3 in fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs for, what is this now, the 6th year in a row. Tampa Bay's really held McCaffrey in check over the years. Yeah, I think he's definitely one of the big talking points of the week this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through this running back list. When you get above DeAndre Swift, right? It's like the Cowboys running backs, but they split the work. Miles Sanders, who I really like this week because you can run on the Giants. I think that's how Philadelphia will bias their attack. Joe Mixon, who should be back at 6,900. Dalvin Cook in this game against the Lions. And then you've got, Nick Chubb against DJ Reader. You got Derrick Henry. You've got Saquon Barkley in a game the Giants should be trailing against Philadelphia. Saquon's hit like over 26 points, once all year, and that was in week 1.
He's lost targets too.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically a yardage and touchdown back at this point. He has 2 games over 22.6 DraftKings points on the season, and one of those is a 26-pointer. He costs $8K in salary. That's pretty absurd. In the game, the Giants should be trailing probably by a significant amount, given how good the Eagles are. And then you got Christian McCaffrey, right? So it's like the running back, your list is already pretty much narrowed down for you this week. And then, yeah, if we end up saying like, because the Christian McCaffrey thing, I'm with you. He's a guy who I've never played against the Bucks, not once. And I always let other people chase that spot. And then now he's with the 49ers, right? So it's like, well, yeah, but this is a different situation. But Brock Purdy is the quarterback. So it's like, how different is this situation? Like, how capable is McCaffrey of absolutely burying me for not playing him? And we certainly know that in this spot, he could get like 18 to 20 points, right? That's not crazy to think that at his price tag, that would hurt people who are playing him. So yeah, running back is very interesting this week. And it might be a week where, really the whole slate, like I think that the slate is going to quickly narrow down our choices for us as guys who kind of understand the NFL and understand these teams and understand how they want to attack each other. And then it's just a question of how you put together rosters from there. So, that's it from me. Do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think Pollard's going to be the highest owned running back this week. That's
Pollard and Swift is going to be the 1-2 combo punch for everyone.
I think people are still going to be a little skeptical of Swift, but he'll be up there. I have one last question for you, and that's Travis Kelce, because I'm looking at the numbers right now, and he ranks third among all wide receivers in DraftKings fantasy points per game. Right behind Justin Jefferson, who's $2,400 more. And what are your thoughts on him, his upside, and just the value he brings at a devalued position?
Yeah, so heading into last week, Travis Kelce was 7th on the slate in pre-touchdown fantasy points, where we can get a sense of like takeaway touchdown variance and what do these guys do just in their role. And he was 7th out of all players on the slate, behind only Tyreek Hill, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, Justin Jefferson. And then I had like Travis Etienne in his small sample size as the lead back, Christian McCaffrey in his small sample size with the 49ers. Were like the guys ahead of him, like one other guy was ahead of him. And then you swing that over to the position that he plays and the fact that most other tight ends are going, like if they put up 12, that's why I liked Kittle last week, because it was like Freiermuth was popular at 4,300. And I like Freiermuth. It is like Freiermuth, you're getting like 12 to 21 points. Kittle, you're getting like 12 to 40 points, right? And so like the separation is just so huge. And it's the same thing with Kelce. It's always a little tough to pay that higher price tag because you're like, yeah, but if he gets me 17 points, then that's going to hurt me because I'm spending all this salary over here. But on the flip side, when he hits for 32 and all the other tight ends, like their good game is 13 points, 14 points, you have such a huge, huge edge on the field. And so, I think that's a super sharp call, right? Like it's not just if you compare him to wide receivers, he's a little bit underpriced. And then he plays at a position that's so thin that when he hits, like it's hard for other people to compete with your roster, just makes him so valuable. So, I think Travis Kelce this week against the Broncos is definitely an interesting spot to consider, especially if we're like looking at these higher priced running backs. We're like, well, there's not a lot to love paying up for here. There's maybe not a lot to love paying up for at the wide receiver position, or at least like we're not going to spend all of our salary there. And then the one big like hurdle that I'll have to jump is every time that Kelce hits, Mahomes hits also. And Mahomes isn't a guy I'm necessarily enthusiastic about playing at his price tag against the Broncos. And maybe that'll prove to be wrong, right? But do I then break that rule and go Kelce without Mahomes? But then I'm also like, if I'm doing that, I still know that Mahomes probably hits if Kelce hits. So it's almost like hedging my bets and saying, yeah, but maybe Kelce doesn't hit here, so I'll just take one piece of this bet, whereas really you should complete the bet. So that'll be the biggest hurdle for me is like, do I see Mahomes hitting here? At the same time, when you watch that Kansas City offense, like I have no concept of how Kansas City didn't put up a huge game this last week. Just because when you watch that offense and then watch other offenses, they're so difficult to stop because they will literally throw the ball to 8 different guys and like scheme plays for these 8 different guys. And all like the plays they're scheming to Jody Fortson are playing to his strengths. The plays they're scheming for Sky Moore are playing to his strengths. And so the defense, it's not like, oh, let's just scheme a play for this guy. It's like, this guy has unique things he's good at, and let's scheme toward that. And so the defense has so much to defend. There's so much movement. There's so much going on that basically, I think they can hit in any matchup. They can hit against the Broncos. But yeah, to me, it's usually Kelce plus Mahomes as opposed to Kelce solo, which will be the big hurdle for me this week.
Got it. Yeah, like I said, I like Mahomes if he goes under-owned. It's just, the spread is worrisome. The matchup is worrisome, but he's probably the most matchup immune quarterback outside of Cincinnati. Like his worst ever half of football was that second half of the playoff game last week. So I think he goes a little lower owned. And then just the spread, a few weeks ago when he was playing, who was it, the Rams? I looked at Mahomes and his like games they were favored by 12 or more points. Like the running backs averaged, 13 rushing yards per game, and Mahomes averaged like 400 passing yards per game. Like even when you think they're going to run, you want them to run, you never run. So yeah, I just see upside there.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that call. And if you're going to bet on, like we always say, matchup lowers chances of hitting ceiling, but it doesn't lower ceiling. Like he still has his high ceiling in that matchup. He might not get there as often in that matchup, but he still has that ceiling in that matchup. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. As always, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you back here next week. We will see you on 1 week season. We will see you on fantasy points, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.